My name is Liz Slusser. I'm one of Housing Connect's supportive housing specialists. I've been with the agency for approximately 7 years. I started in our eligibility department working on our housing choice voucher or Section 8 program, and then transitioned into our supportive housing department.
Awesome. And so Housing Connect pretty much sounds like what the name implies, right?
Right. So we are a traditional housing authority, or PHA, depending on who you're talking with. Lots of acronyms and lingo in the housing world.
Yeah.
What we do is provide housing assistance to low-income households within Salt Lake County. We changed from the Housing Authority of the County of Salt Lake several years ago to Housing Connect because we thought it would emulate more of what we're doing in the community, which is really attempting to connect to our partners and to the community to help revitalize neighborhoods, to really provide safe, affordable, decent housing.
So one of the biggest challenges for us as Valley Behavioral Health is helping folks who are struggling stay housed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that we work with Housing Connect and Salt Lake Housing Authority to try to find housing for people, but it's getting harder and harder. And for the folks who haven't been paying attention, what's causing this?
Through all of our programs, our goal is the same, right? We want to keep people stably housed. We want to keep them, safe as possible in those decent apartments that we're helping pay for in part. When we see stability issues, we're looking at a lot of tenancy issues. So stuff that I think is a challenge for anyone, regardless of their income status or really their background, but it's living with other people. A lot of the apartment complexes that are within the city are becoming much more dense than a lot of people who have lived in this community for the last several decades have experienced. And so with that comes more challenge of just being in closer proximity to people. A lot of what we see, like I said, is tenancies, so small or minor lease violations that then become higher or a higher frequency. So tenants that want to support their friends that might still be experiencing homelessness. So they have what we would call high traffic. That becomes a problem. I think smoking in units is also something we see a lot of issues with. When we're targeting, especially people who've experienced homelessness, who haven't been housed for quite some time, the transition into housing can be quite difficult. And so when we're working with previously chronic homeless individuals, that's a lot of what case management needs to focus on. We need the support to maintain housing stability is really helping people learn how to become tenants again. I think the other piece that is the elephant in the room, but not really the elephant, because we're all really talking about it and really aware of it, is
right.
The price. We're seeing our community get priced out of units. And that's the tough thing, is that when we don't have a lot of legislation on like rent caps or anything like that, the market drives price. And when one landlord or property management company starts renting for a higher amount, everybody's going to follow suit. So that, and just again, the stock. We don't have enough affordable units.
Right. And we're looking at, over the next 20 years, Salt Lake Valley's population doubling.
Correct.
That's the projection.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have folks that are on a fixed income, perhaps Social Security, for $900,
Mm-hmm.
and your average apartment here costs more than that. So how are folks supposed to live off of that?
So I think some of that is what we as an agency are here to support with, is to help provide a subsidy to support those people on fixed incomes. And then, of course, the specialty programs that target individuals that have other barriers or have others, are coming from other referral sources. So different situations in their lives that have brought them to whatever provider we're working with. But to combat the rising price, I'm not positive. It goes a little bit above me and how we'll really address it. But I know our community and the folks up on the Hill, as well as local governments, are working on trying to find solutions. I guess this is one way to say is there's not one easy way to solve our problem. It's going to take the whole community.
We work at Valley with a lot of folks who are going through the recovery process, mm-hmm. and finding sobriety. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we've identified as being the greatest factor to their success in recovery is housing. Mm-hmm. And yet, when I was working in case management a few years back, it seemed like the waiting list for somebody who was looking for housing was anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. Do you find that to be consistent?
It depends on what subsidy programs we're talking about.
Gotcha.
Housing is not as simple. Like, I've had case managers come to me and say, like, I need housing for my client. And that's not a simple question.
No.
It's a one question, but there's never a simple answer, because it's what's the situation this client is coming from? Are they currently homeless? Have they been homeless for a long period of time? If they have been in recovery treatment, how long have they been in that treatment program? Does that program have its own housing or options? What's the client's goal. That's a whole lot of this. Because some of it may be that a client has gone through treatment here in the county, but they have plans to move elsewhere because they have family support that will help them with their sobriety somewhere else. And it's what options might be in that somewhere else. When we talk about like, we need housing for our clients, is what kind of housing? And everybody has a case by case, right? So with Housing Connect, we partner with Valley for a handful of specialty referral-based programs. I manage the majority of them, but there are some where, of course, folks are going to get into like our Section 8 program or Housing Choice Voucher. And for that program, because Housing Choice Vouchers are for any household within the county that's low income, the wait list is probably about 6 years right now.
Wow.
We've got something, so this was from a mid-March number, but we had 6,796 households on our waiting list. And that's a lot of people in our community that are struggling to pay their rent.
Wow.
And that's just our Housing Choice Voucher program alone. Of course, when you look at kind of at all of our waiting lists, they're going to have multiple applications, right? So some of these households might be duplicated across, but like our public housing programs are about 5,506-ish households. So some of those people might be on the Section 8 list as well as public housing. So there's duplicates, but like that's a lot of households in our community in need. So it's not as simple as just get on a list and wait, right? With our specialty programs specific to our Valley clients, we have really 3 that are our primary that we work direct with Valley to refer into. The program I think that's going to be most well known is HARP, Homeless Rental Assistance Program. It's not a very creative name, but as the name says, we're targeting individuals who are homeless that need rental assistance. But the main goal is to target people who are coming out of inpatient or recovery treatment to get them stable. HARP is a transitional housing program, so it is shorter term. It's not long term. It's not a permanent voucher. And that's something that we communicate as best we can to everybody who's coming onto the program, but it's always a wish. We wish it could be, but it's not. Valley in particular, we work with a lot of the teams, but they're referring individuals in who have strong success or hope for success in becoming self-sufficient at the end of, we start with 9 months, but it can be up to 24 months of assistance. So referring people who have good prospects at finding a pathway to self-sufficiency.
I know you've been working quite a bit with James Weir and Josh Adams at our core program, and they've been thrilled with some of the success that they've had lately. How does an agency like Valley and an agency like yours continue to build roads to success for our mutual clients in the future?
I think so much of it is really the work we do interpersonally and building really good, strong, robust relationships with one another. I know we all in this community become pretty familiar with one another, at least the agencies, and there might be key people that we meet and then work with collaboratively. And I think that's the really big part here. I think through COVID, we all experienced this time where we were kind of in vacuums of our own internal stuff. And not everyone focused a ton on themselves. There was still a lot of outward work, but some agencies maybe focused more internally and lost sight of some of those collaborative pieces. And I think that's something specific with James and Josh that we've been working on, is reinforcing those connections and actually getting in front of each other again as we've been able to really do those in-person things, because there's so much value to it. When we partners are meeting together and collaborating, even just in meetings, that energy carries through to our clients. And building those roadways to each agency is so beneficial. And that once, I have a great working relationship with James at this point, as well as Josh, I can then say when somebody's like, hey, do you know who to get in touch with that can help me with this Valley client? It's like, yeah, let me call James, or let me give you James' number. And those pieces that we rely on one another can grow from there. I think that's a fundamental piece, is just really that collaboration and connecting with each other on a regular basis. We all have 100 meetings, so it's not always adding another meeting, but it's finding ways to productively work on those pieces.
That's awesome. So looking at the future, again, we've got explosive growth. We've got potential looming issues here in Utah. We've got a water crisis that seems to be being ignored. We have an unsheltered population that is continuing to be unsheltered. We have a housing crisis that the 15 cranes in the Salt Lake Valley skyline seem to belie that. It's like, how can we have a housing crisis when we have so much construction going on? And we have an explosion in the cost of living here in Salt Lake as far as staying housed is concerned. How does the future look for somebody in your role?
I mean, it's a hard question, I think, for anybody and positioned in any of our social service agencies. But I think what I guess I'll pose it as this is like what I look forward to what our agency will continue to do is stay actively engaged with the community to do our best to meet need, be creative in how we're meeting those needs. We're going to, and we've always done this, but rely on our partners, Valley included, to help adapt to those challenges and changes. We've done some fantastic collaborative work with First Step House with the opening of Central City apartments, with VOA, with Denver Street Apartments. We continue to work collaboratively with other partners in the agency. I expect that one of the ways we'll meet the challenges of the changing landscape in Salt Lake County is to continue to do that, to really rely upon agencies like Valley who provide all of that direct service work so that us at Housing can really then become that connector piece in helping subsidize rents, in providing apartment complexes throughout the valley that can support individuals that have severe mental illnesses or have experienced homelessness that really need that support in those tenancy issues that I talked about earlier of just being able to learn how to live again in an apartment. Because I don't think it takes very much experience of talking to someone who's experienced homeless, of knowing that it's a challenge. It's a humongous challenge.
It's survival.
You have to change the way you approach life because you don't know where your next meal is coming from. You don't know where your next shower is coming from. You're not even positive you'll have somewhere safe to sleep. And so once you give somebody a place, of course, that's always our goal. But there's so much work that comes after that.
Right.
It's not just getting someone housing, it's keeping them housed.
Well, and there could be so much trauma, there could be behavioral health issues, there could be sobriety issues that come into play.
Well, you might not even know that client is facing those things until they're housed because they've been in survival mode. They've not had an opportunity to even think about the problems they've had. And it's something that my counterpart here at our agency who runs our COC program, Danielle Castillo, could speak much more to. But we often see clients struggle with physical health and stuff that they've ignored or not taken care of because they've not ever had the time or space to do it. And so to kind of go to back to where we can see ourselves in our future here is that we're going to see much more of this partnership and we're going to rely more heavily upon it because it really will take the community to solve any part of any of these problems.
We've been talking a lot since May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and that's something that, of course, as a behavioral health agency, we try to focus on strongly. Destigmatizing mental health issues seems to be something that we're finding by accepting the fact that folks may have behavioral health issues that could be challenges for them. Do you feel like that approach would actually help with the unsheltered population if we came to not how do we prevent this, but how do we accept this and then move forward? Do you think that's an avenue we should be looking at? Or
I absolutely think it is. And I think part of the challenge we've been talking about of why people may find themselves unstably housed again is because there is stigma around being unsheltered and having experienced homelessness or having had a substance use disorder. Once somebody finds out that about you, it changes their perception of you and then you may be treated differently for it. I mean, if we could destigmatize those elements in our communities, I think we would see a much higher success rate of stable housing, of actual community building. And I think it would solve all of our problems. But I think understanding would become much more prevalent and we would see people be able to support one another opposed to that person has got a lot of people there, that person is up all night, that person has, loud music or whatever it is, or that person never leaves their home. Right? That becomes something that the community then nitpicks and points fingers at, unfortunately.
That makes that person's life even harder.
Correct. I think destigmatizing it would be fantastic. And having worked, done most of my work in the supportive housing department here with individuals living with HIV/AIDS, the refugee population, as well as individuals living with severe mental illness, it would be monumentally helpful, I think, in keeping people housed safely.
If we just educate ourselves and accept it a little bit better.
And pause and do that thing like walk a mile,
in
someone else's shoes and understand that things that we think are so simple may not be simple for someone else. And I think it's those stops and pause, when we pause in our lives and go wow, yeah, that is a really challenging situation, paying rent every month. Many of us think well, that's just something you do. But that could mean going to a place to get a money order. You have to interact with however many people on your way there. You have to get there. You have to know how to get a money order. You have to talk to the people. And for a lot of our folks that we work with, that's a massive challenge.
And that's the only solution they have to getting a bill paid.
Right. Right. And so, I think destigmatizing some of that, being willing to support, like having community being more willing to support individuals with conditions that might make those things challenging, it would get us so much further. I mean, I know our case management teams, that's what we do with them, is we work to help them with their ADLs, or daily living. It's important that we remember that it might not be challenging for everyone, but it might be the end of the world for someone else.
When you see alternative housing projects like the Other Side Village coming together, which I've been following this keenly because to me it seems like such a radical departure from our traditional housing models. How do you think that's going to come into play with traditional housing? But how do you think that's going to come into play with traditional housing programs, county housing programs, nonprofit housing programs in the future?
I think any alternatives to what the standard is can be really good in theory.
Right.
I mean, some of this is we'll have to see how they play out. Right. I think one of the challenges that we have on the federal level is they're slow to adapt to changes. So we probably won't see a lot of immediate support or availability of funding potentially because, pigs can fly. It'll be a challenge in some ways to subsidize some of these programs, unless we're getting specific local community funding from, the county or the cities to fund these. So I think as far as from a rental subsidy program standpoint, that'll be a challenge because much of what we do is entrenched in HUD policy, HUD regulation, and there's not, again, I'm probably going to eat my words, but HUD generally doesn't jump when you say, hey, we have this new thing we want to try. But they, we're a Move to Work agency. We just received that award to participate in the demonstration for that. And though I am not well versed in it, because unfortunately none of my programs will really get to participate in it, HUD is attempting to change or at least investigate what changes may be very beneficial to the changing landscape that we are in as a nation, not just alone in our county. But I think those are our biggest challenges, is going to be finding ways to subsidize. I think in general, alternative options are great. I mean, we run some programs that are very unlike what our traditional housing is. So our Rio Master Lease program that we work with CORE and JDOT with Valley directly with is that we master lease units. So we go out into the community and say, hey, landlord, can we rent your unit? Housing Connect becomes the tenant. And then we sublet it to participants of the JDOT and CORE teams.
Gotcha.
So this is actually an old model, but it's so old that it's unknown. And it's not well known because it's really difficult to do. It takes a lot of collaboration between the agencies as well as willingness on the landlord's part to not really know who they're housing, right? Because we're subletting. So we're taking a participant that is ready for the option from CORE and JDOT. And we say, okay, here's an apartment to live in. We rent to them. So Housing Connect is the subletter.
Right.
And then that tenant has to follow the lease terms and hopefully integrate into that community quite well, because that's what it's for. It's a transitional housing option for individuals who are coming out of recovery or incarceration settings to reintegrate. Part of the reason it's really successful is because it's so low barrier. We're not, we run a background check, but we're not looking at credit. We're not looking at the things that renters in our market are looking for. And we're giving everybody an opportunity that everybody that we can reasonably give an opportunity to, we're giving them an opportunity, and they have to remain compliant with the teams that referred them. Those teams have to also engage with those clients, do home visits, make sure that they're in compliance with if they have court involvement, that kind of stuff. And that's one of those alternative housing options that we're talking about that's just not as well known, but is fairly successful.
Yeah.
It's a challenge. Some of the clientele has a harsher or more difficult criminal history and a propensity to reoffend. And so that can be challenging in administration. But the whole point is to give them an opportunity, a stepping stone, if you will, to get out of those settings, to participate in community life again. And then hopefully within a considerable amount of time, usually about 24 months, move into something that's permanent, right?
Gotcha.
We can be wildly successful with alternative housing options, but even with the REAL program, there are setbacks. There are people who unfortunately don't succeed.
Right.
That we do see reoffend, that we do see rehospitalized, or, sometimes return to homelessness because, that's what's happened. But we're always up for an opportunity to have someone try for success. And I think if we can develop more of those or find other ways to implement programs similar to that really reduce barriers and that give people the opportunity to maybe have a couple setbacks, but still maintain their housing, we're always, looking for those kinds of opportunities.
So it sounds like case management is really a huge pillar of the success of programs like this.
Absolutely. we wouldn't be able to run our Rio program without the work that the core team and the JDOT team do to keep their clients housed. And we have other referring partners that utilize the master lease program, and just as much as we rely on the core and JDOT teams to help our clients that are working with them, we rely on our other partners. So it's very much one of those deeply collaborative and wouldn't work without one arm of us functioning and supporting.
Even as big and oppressive and daunting of a task as this is, you sound like you're fairly optimistic about the work that you're doing here.
Sure. I mean, some of it is like, are there good days and bad days? Absolutely. Are
Sure.
there good hours and bad hours of a day?
Right.
Yes. But I think some of it is that at the core, I believe in what we do here. I believe that housing is a fundamental right, that we all deserve somewhere safe and decent to call our own, to store our stuff at, and most importantly, like have a safe place to sleep at night. And so even though we have a ton of challenges ahead of us, we know that this is so essential to a safe community, to being a human, that I do feel optimistic that we'll continue to rise to the occasion and we'll continue to have partners that rise to the occasion with us.
Liz, thank you for taking the time to talk with us.
Absolutely.